Hi class. I'm going to give a video lecture here on chapter 2 of Franz de Waal's book on sympathy. So the way the strategy of the book is, right, is the argument that human morality is based in some of the things we inherit from our biological past. There are necessary components to human morality that we inherit. If we didn't have them, there wouldn't be human morality, right? So one of the necessary features of human morality is moral emotions, like sympathy and empathy. I naturally care for my children, for my family, for my friends, for other people. I don't want to see people hurting. I don't like that. I want to alleviate suffering. Those are moral emotions that I don't choose. They arise naturally as an emotional desire, like, I hate to see people hurting. I want to stop that. My baby's crying. I want to make sure, are they hungry? Are they tired? What can I do to help them, right? Those moral emotions that we have that are very natural are necessary for morality, for us to act kindly to one another, to try to help one another, to alleviate one another's suffering. But these feelings don't drop out of the sky with humans. We see them in non-human animals. We see things like a concern for fairness. We see things like punishing cheaters, anger. We see things like sympathy and empathy. We see these moral emotions, these necessary components of human morality in non-human animals. And so the building blocks for human morality we inherit as part of our evolutionary past. So Franz de Waal believes that this is the case, and it's going to help us understand human behavior a lot if we can see where we inherited these things from, if we look at animal behavior first. And so he wants to look at sympathy in chapter 2 and evaluate, do we have good evidence that animals in fact are feeling sympathy? So the first thing is, what's the difference between sympathy and empathy? Empathy is vital. It's a first step. Empathy means I have to be able to take your perspective. I have to understand how the world might look from your vantage point. So I didn't experience the pain, you did, but I can imagine how it would feel to be you. I can take your perspective. That's empathy, right? Cognitive empathy is perspective taking. But then I'm also going to start to feel the things you feel. So if I'm around someone very sad, they're crying or upset, my posture is going to be sad, my mood is going to come down, I'm going to start to feel sad, and there's going to be a kind of an emotional mimicking or imitation there. That is sort of a necessity for empathy, deep empathy. So you've got cognitive empathy, that perspective taking. You've got emotional imitation and behavioral imitation, facial expression imitation. Sympathy goes a step further. So sympathy includes empathy, but it's also the desire to alleviate suffering. I'm going to do something. Empathy can be very neutral. I don't have to do anything. I can kind of be a bystander. It just is the way I think and the way I feel. But sympathy is very proactive, right? So I'm going to actually go out and try to help you in your suffering, provide food, comfort, a hug. So sympathy really is action to alleviate that suffering. So then the chapter sort of has several examples, like the pseudo-orcas. There's one that's injured, it's dying, it's in shallow water. The other pseudo-orcas create a wedge formation or a V formation to protect. It puts all of them in danger to be in shallow water like this. They're doing it because they recognize one of their own is hurt, it's dying, they can't protect themselves, and then they have sympathy to go and protect, right? Once the injured pseudo-orca dies, the rest go into deep water and they go about their business. But there seems to be like real costly behavior to them in order to protect one of their own. They mentioned elephants. When one dies, they rub with their trunk. They stay around for days as it decomposes. They're not moving. They're not eating as much. They're putting themselves at great risk. They're more danger with regarding predators because they're not on the move. So they have all these things, but they seem to care. They've got tears that seem to occur only when heightened emotion happens within elephants. And so something like sympathy seems to be happening here, grief, right? They talk about primates taking care of the disabled, that they recognize if they don't have hands, if I didn't have hands, I couldn't feed myself. They don't have hands, they can't feed themselves. We need to go and take care of them. There seems to be some empathy, some recognition of their worldview and what the world might look like to them, and then sympathy in trying to alleviate some of that struggle and suffering. So they give several of these examples to say, this capacity did not drop out of the sky with humans, but it has been building throughout the animal world, getting heightened forms of sympathy in advanced mammals and most in humans, right? But the problem is animals can't talk. They can't tell us what they're thinking, what they're feeling. So there are certain things that are private, right? So motives are private, thoughts are private, desires are private, emotions are private. We can see behavior. So we see the animal behavior, but then we are inferring what are their thoughts, what are their motives, what are their emotions, what are their desires, and we don't know. So Frans de Waal says we should not eliminate the option, we should not eliminate the possibility that animals feel what we're feeling to some degree, that animals are thinking what we're thinking to some degree, that animals have motives that are similar to ours. We shouldn't eliminate that, but we shouldn't assume it either. We need to try to test. So we need to try to test to see whether that is the case or not. So there are certain examples that might help. So one of the examples that he gives is on it's on 82 and 83. So one of these has a simian ape, and they're out in their habitat. They have a horizontal log, and there are 6 tires on the log that are on there a little bit tight. There's some gap, and on the very last tire, the 6th tire, there's water that's accumulated in the tire. And one of the simians really wants to get that water, but he can't get his hand in. So then he's trying to get the tire off, but it's the 6th one in a row, and he can't figure out how to do it. 10 minutes he spent doing this, just gives up. One of the other simians has been watching this whole time, sees the larger male sit, goes over, and they realize, if I take the first tire off, I can get all of them off, and I can get to that 6th one with water. So it takes the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and they're just tossing them, right? When they get to the 6th that has water, they're very careful. They slide it off the horizontal log. They are careful not to spill the water. They bring it over to the male who was trying earlier and give it to them. The male takes it, drinks. Well, that simian that's watching has to have empathy, at least cognitive empathy. I know what that monkey wants. I know that the motive of that simian is to get to the water. So there has to be empathy on the part of the younger simian. They have to be able to problem solve how to get it off. They have to care about bringing water to their... They could have drank the water themselves, but they gave it to the person who needed it. That seems to be something like sympathy. So a lot of these higher level things that we need for empathy and sympathy seem to be demonstrated in these kinds of examples. What else would explain it? Right? This is not hardwired behavior. So a second example was at the San Diego Zoo, and I've been there before. You walk up to, there's a fence, and you can see the monkey habitats, and then there's a big moat in between you and their habitat, so they can't get out, can't get to you. It's steep down. But there's a chain where they can crawl down into the moat, and you can see them right below you, and they can climb back up. Well, it tells the story of one of these simians where when their dad, the alpha male, would go down, they would pull the chain up, and they would trap the dad down there. And they would smile, and they would make their sort of laughing noises. He would slap the side. The simian knew that by pulling up the chain, he traps his dad, right? So he has to know, what's my dad going to feel when I do this? Frustrated, trapped. That's what makes it funny, right? Humor requires all of these higher level cognitive abilities. There's a plan in place about how to trap the dad. So when we see examples like this, it seems as though it's reasonable to infer something like sympathy, empathy, perspective taking. that we can infer that there are certain motives and emotions involved. One of the things DeWalt talks about is how unique chimpanzees are. So you have apes and you have monkeys, and they're different on the evolutionary tree. Our closest evolutionary relative are apes, and namely chimpanzees, not macaws and other kinds of monkey, right? Well, apes, as opposed to monkeys, display higher forms of sympathy, higher forms of perspective taking, problem solving. That shouldn't surprise us, given that we have these abilities, right? But they've tested this. So they've tried to show how if you show a chimpanzee, right, you show a chimpanzee where some food is hidden, you bring that chimpanzee back, you let the whole group out, the chimp will lead them all to where the food is, right? So they say, hey, come on, right? So there's an idea like, I know where something is, but I know you don't know that. Humans don't develop this ability till the age of 6, okay? Chimps recognize, I know something you don't. Come with me. They show the food. But in this particular instance, this case study, there was an alpha male that started pushing the one that knew where the food was aside and taking it for themselves, right? So the next time they took this more submissive chimp to show them where the food was and then brought the whole troop out, they tried to trick the alpha male. They knew, if I go here, the alpha male will know that's where the food is. But if I go to some other place, that's where they'll think the food is. I'll trick them, and then I'll double back to where the real food is. Well, then when the alpha male realizes that they're getting tricked, then they weren't fooled anymore. They are like, I know what they're thinking, and I know how to use what they're thinking against them to be deceptive. So there's like a lot of higher level thinking, higher forms of cognitive empathy and sympathy displayed there. Something else to note, there's the principle of parsimony, and this is important. There's 2 different principles that Duvall mentions in chapter 2 related to parsimony. One of them is not as relevant. The second is, the first is the simplest solution is usually the right one, right? You don't want to go to a complex answer if a simple one will do. So with non-human animals, why would we go to advanced emotions, advanced motives, advanced desires? Why would we jump to advanced explanation when a simple explanation will do? That makes some sense to me, right? You should give a simple explanation like, they're not copying emotion, they're just copying behavior, right? That's a simple explanation. Copying emotion is an advanced ability. We shouldn't assume that unless we have to. Always stick with the most fundamental or basic explanation, not the advanced. The second form of parsimony, though, is if humans evolved from chimps, then the cognitive structures that underlie our motives, our intentions, our desires, our thoughts, if those same cognitive structures are present in chimps, we should assume that they are thinking similar things, similar, not exact, similar, feeling similar feelings, having similar motives. It would be very strange if we had similar cognitive machinery and had totally different motives, totally different emotions, totally different desires. We have 97, 98% of the same genetic material in the same structure, found in the same places along our genetic sequencing. It would be very strange indeed if these chimps didn't have similar motives and thoughts and desires. And so parsimony is, what's the simplest explanation? Well, humans evolved from apes, and we inherited much of the same genetic material, neurological activity, etc. So those same structures are playing a role in both of us. And if that's true, then it shouldn't be totally fallacious. It seems like there's good reasoning to think animals do in fact feel sympathy and empathy for one another, given their behavior and cognitive ability. Finish the reading, answer those questions, engage the text directly in your questions, and I hope you have a really good spring break.